Now, in contrast to the Liberals here, you know, like, hey fellas, what do we actually stand for? Oops, we lost again. In contrast, in Italy, a revolution. The yesterday elected its first female Prime Minister. But don't expect the women's movement to cheer. The new Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, is the daughter of a communist who abandoned his family, but she joined the far right as a teenager, and at just 31 was already a minister in the government of Silvio Berlusconi. Now at 45, she's the leader of her own party and the Prime Minister, leading a right-wing coalition, including Berlusconi, and an anti-immigration party. And already the media is warning this is the return of fascism in Italy. The fascism of Mussolini still has a hold on Italy, we're told. And in Australia, on the national broadcaster, the same accusation.
Giorgia Meloni's neo-fascist Brothers of Italy party was widely expected to win.
But what exactly is it about Meloni that is fascist or neo-fascist? Here's what she said 2 years ago about her core beliefs, which are protecting a country's borders, national character and its sovereignty. These things do matter.
Our main enemy today is the globalist drift of those who view identity in all its forms to be an evil to be overcome, and constantly acts to shift real power away from the people to supranational entities headed by supposedly enlightened elites. It means that, whether the false Democrats like it or not, national conservatives in every latitude are actually the only real Democrats, because it is only by defending the nation state that we defend the political sovereignty that belongs to the citizens of that state. But
on the campaign trail in Italian, Meloni has been more confronting. She is against the culture wars and identity politics that have obsessed the political elite here too, and made so many more marginalised people, poorer people, feel their world is being turned on its head.
Sí a la familia natural, no a los lobby LGBT, sí a la identidad sexual, no a la ideología de género, sí a la cultura de la vida, no al abismo de la muerte, sí a la universalidad de la cruz, no a la violencia islamista, sí a fronteras seguras, no a la inmigración masiva, sí al trabajo de nuestros ciudadanos, no a las grandes finanzas internacionales. Sí.
Well, but Meloni at least has the sense of humour to put out a TikTok video before the election making a play on her name, Meloni, to get out the vote. Well, is that a fascist? I don't know. But in the end, what got this so-called fascist elected? With a lot of Italians sick of the lockdowns, big governments forcing them to stay in their homes during the pandemic. They're sick of the mess, sluggish economy, political instability, energy crisis caused in part by green extremism. I mean, I don't know. Do you have to be a fascist to be upset with all that? And of course, yes, many are sick of mass immigration from North Africa and the Middle East. But then again, which country in Europe doesn't feel under a little pressure that way? Earlier this month, right-wing parties won the election even in Sweden. Left-wing Sweden, with a big winner, a hardline anti-immigration party. I'm joined now from Rome to try and make sense of this by Professor Marla Stone. She's an historian and author of The Fascist Revolution in Italy. Professor Stone, thank you so much for coming on the show. Try to give us put this in some sort of historical context for us. Meloni's party, Sons of Italy, we're told used to glorify Mussolini, the fascist dictator, but is it fair to call her today a fascist or a neo-fascist?
Well, that's the question on everyone's mind, right? Her origins are clearly in the inheritor party of the fascist party. She was a fascist activist as a youth, but we've seen her in the last few months of the election campaign moderate her positions. I think we have to see how she's going to govern. Last night in her victory speech, she talked about governing for all Italians, attempting to quell people's fears about her being a fascist. So I think right now we can call her an authoritarian nationalist, and that the causes for her victory are both global and local, right? There has been a move towards authoritarianism everywhere from Turkey to India to Hungary to the United States. So she's coming out of this global move. And then, as you said, there's deep disillusionment with the political system. And she was able to position herself as outside the political system because she didn't participate in the Draghi government. So the discontent with the last government moved towards her, the discontent with the other parties in the center right.
Now, you said a move to authoritarian governments. I mean, I would have thought that some of Meloni's supporters would say, well, wait a minute, the authoritarian governments have been on the left, you're suppressing debate, cancel culture, locking people in their homes during the pandemic, etc., etc. And it would strike me as, in some part, a revolt of the people who felt powerless in the face of an agenda that they see being driven increasingly by European Union and things like that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the culture war part of it. And she tapped into the culture war really well by talking about traditional families, by talking about an LGBT lobby. Those are sort of triggers for people that are feeling economic discontent, feeling like the traditional parties are corrupt. And then you throw the extra layer of the culture war, and she becomes the representative of Italy, of Italians, of things that people are worried they're losing.
It's just, for me, one of the touchstones is, you know, what makes my hackles rise is attitudes towards Vladimir Putin, right? She has been, and this has reassured me a lot, a very strong supporter of NATO and particularly of supporting Ukraine against the Russian invaders. What does that tell us, particularly when actually not other members of a coalition actually agree with this?
Yeah, I think, again, she is trying to fit herself in as a more traditional politician. I think she will remain the same on the issue of Russia and Ukraine. We'll see how much she wants to rankle the EU. She's going to be very tough on EU immigration policy, no question, on some EU budget rules, because she's made promises to raise pensions, to raise salaries. That's going to come into conflict with EU policy. So we'll see how she actually governs, right? That's the question, the gap between the rhetoric and the governance.
Totally agree with you. In fact, I texted one of my relatives in Holland who was worried about this. I said, well, just see what she does. For me, that's the test. But Professor Stone, here we have people in the media saying fascist government, neo-fascist, and as you say, her party had some roots in the past to Mussolini's old party and all that kind of stuff. But the people who voted for her, do you detect in your studies of fascism in Italy, do you detect really, do you think that's why voters went there? They thought Mussolini, he wasn't too bad a character after all. Let's vote for this Meloni.
No, I don't think that drove most voters. I think it was one of these votes of discontent, votes for someone perceived to be outside of the system, a protest vote. I think there's probably some parallels to votes for Trump in 2016 in the United States. We also have to keep in mind, yesterday was the historically lowest voter turnout in Italy's post-war history. Only 63% of the electorate went to vote. And a lot of the people who didn't vote were people who were refusing to vote for the left and couldn't vote for the right. So people who would have been in the left coalition who stayed home. And that's a sign about the failure of the center left.
I think that's a fascinating stat. That Professor Marla Stone, thank you so much indeed for your time.